joined today by Tal Schneider, political correspondent at Globes at what is a very, very crazy time for Israeli politics. That's why we're starting a little late. I think Tal probably just finished up watching the Prime Minister's press conference on the day of his indictment. Many things are happening with the Prime Minister's indictment coming just a day after Benny Gantz informed President Rivlin that he would be unable to form a government with his current mandate and would return it. So, Tal, before we get into what happened today with the indictment, let's start yesterday when Benny Gantz returned his mandate after failing to form a government after Prime Minister Netanyahu previously failed. So why was Gantz unable to form a government at the end of the day?
Right, Benny Gantz was unable to form a government because the Likud was actually unwilling to discuss with him between those two parties. The Likud came up with this, we called it a 55 block, a block of the entire right-wing parties, and they were unwilling to to discuss on a bilateral manner, right? Benny Gantz wanted to discuss it with the Likud. He did not want to discuss the entire coalition agreement with the ultra-Orthodox and the religious Zionists, but Netanyahu was unwilling to dissolve his bloc, knowing that going on with this bloc will obviously fail Gantz from forming a coalition. In addition to that, Netanyahu was very stubborn or very persistent with respect to who goes first as a prime minister. He said, I go first and this is it. And the negotiation on that front were problematic because Benny Gantz's biggest campaign promise was not to sit under a prime minister who has an indictment, which we see today. This is the case, and everybody knew it was coming. So Gantz was facing a major problem. Should I be this politician who is just letting go of all of my campaign promises for the good of the country, sitting together and forming a government, or should I be insisting on my values and the things that I claimed, and the way he managed to get to being the biggest party actually is, one of the reasons that Gantz was big success in the last election was specifically the promise not to sit with Netanyahu. This is the reason so many people vote for him.
Right.
So, in doing so, if he would do so, he would just, immediately lose his base. And this is, we have to say, this is a new party. People voted for him solely on that, not solely, but, mostly on that basis.
So there was some speculation about the possible alternative that Gantz could try to form or threaten to form a center-left government, minority government, with Avigdor Lieberman that would have the support from the outside of the joint list. And this was something that was speculated a lot about, and Netanyahu repeatedly, tried to attack this possibility and charged, was inciting against Arab political leaders. Do you think it was ever a real possibility that such a coalition could have been formed? Was it something that Blue and White and Gantz were ever seriously considering? And at the end of the day, why was that not a route that they went down?
So if that was a real possibility, you have to understand that 33 mandates, 33 seats of Blue and White are comprised from very different people. I would say that at least part of this party was willing to go ahead with a plan like that. But some people from the, right part of this party were not willing to consider it. Now, the big question is whether the joint list wanted that. There are two possibilities here. One possibility is to be part of the government, and another possibility is not to be part of the government, but support the government from the outskirts. In order to be part of the Israeli government, for Ahmed Tibi and Ayman Odeh to take ministerial jobs, I think that's a huge problem for them as well. Probably they were unwilling to go ahead and become ministers. In Israel, the system is very different from the American system. Our government is based on the basis of a shared responsibility government, which means that all the ministers in the government, this is like the British system, right? It's not like your system. It means that all of the ministers in one government share the responsibility for all decisions. So for example, if the government makes a decision to incursion or operation in Gaza, then the entire ministers are responsible for whatever is the outcome of that incursion. And I think Ahmed Tibi and Ayman Odeh are unwilling to share that responsibility. You can understand them. They have relatives, not themselves, but their communities have relatives, and this is off the table. So the other option is the Rabin model. It's the 1992 or 1993 model by Yitzhak Rabin. And this model has a precedent in Israel history. This is nothing new. You can support the government from the outskirts, being the joint list, voting with the government, a little bit like independent senators or so. You vote with the government, you are not part of the government. The exchange for that would be committee assignments, budget resources, bills that are important to them, a break on with respect to violence on the Arab street and so on. So that second option was actually, I think, on the table for several politicians, but because they're not part of the government, and we're talking about 13 seats, then Blue and White, which has 33 seats, has had to come up with other supporters. They needed actually, in order to conclude that kind of a very complicated compromise, they needed Labor, they needed Democratic Union Meretz, and they also needed Avigdor Lieberman to support that option, which is something that they couldn't get, because Avigdor Lieberman would not join this kind of really, I would call it, a weird solution, right? This is not a natural solution. He would not join that. And without Lieberman on board on that, this possibility became kind of maybe a political stunt. It was a political chip in order to put the pressure on the Likud, sort of, if you don't come and join us, we'll form this, halfway government based on outskirts support from the joint list. And Netanyahu was doing is a huge campaign, which you called racist, and I think you're very right on with that. But he had also a political mission, and the political mission for Netanyahu was to show the real face of this sort of halfway government. So in order to do that, he just recruited so many bashing and insulting and racist slurs. I mean, I'm having a hard time with that, because we've been with those slurs and with this rhetoric through the campaign already on September and on August. So the bad rhetoric came back to haunt us from Netanyahu, and I suspect that we will have this rhetoric with us for a long time from now. It's really a disturbing issue in Israel right now. You do see some right-wing politicians coming through and saying this is wrong, but they don't do it. One of them is Moshe Gafni from United Torah, but he did not do it right away. He waited a couple of days. It's not as the wording that protect the Arabs is not as strong as the wording that is bashing them, unfortunately.
Yeah, it seems like it's become a very commonplace political tactic to bash the Arab population and get away with it.
And if I may add, it's actually working as a counterproductive, because this is what happened through the second campaign, and it made the Arab society come out and vote in a higher turnout. And what their politicians are saying right now, Ayman Odeh and Ahmed Tibi, if you listen to them, they are promising to take the joint list from 13 seats to 15 seats with the so-called help of the prime minister, because he is so insightful. This is getting people, it's how do you say that? It's getting the base out, right?
Turnout is going up. Yeah.
Yep.
I want to remind people, first of all, that you can also submit questions for Tal via the Zoom or on Facebook. We'll take one now before we turn to what happened today with the indictment. So another question coming in from Stuart, which is about Avigdor Lieberman. What does Lieberman want, Tal, do you think? He had the option of trying to form a right-wing government with Netanyahu and his bloc of 55, and he didn't do it. As you just said, he could have tried to form this minority government with Gantz, and he didn't do it. He tried to get the unity government. It didn't happen. What is his endgame here? And is he okay with this going to a third election?
So first, let me say it's really hard for me as a reporter to get what Lieberman wants thoroughly. It's not like he says exactly, and he has a record of untrustworthiness. So it's not like I can tell you something that he said and this is it. Taking that into account, we do see a pattern here. If you look back at the pattern goes back to 2015. So in 2015, Lieberman was actually staying put. He was recommending Netanyahu for the president to be the one who formed the government, but then on the coalition negotiation, he was unhappy and he chose to stay out. If you remember back to 2015, Netanyahu actually had a 61 very narrow government for the first year. During that time, Lieberman was sitting out, hoping that the government will be toppled, and it didn't work. So jumping forward to 2019, we call it term A, 2015 in April, Lieberman did the same. He actually recommended Prime Minister Netanyahu in the process as the prime minister, but then through the negotiation process, which took all the way from April to May until the end of May of 2019, Lieberman chose to stay out. But this time around, Netanyahu did not have a 61, he had a 60. With a 60, you cannot form a government, and therefore this trick worked this time around. It worked. I think what is the trick? We do believe that Lieberman has decided to just get rid of Netanyahu. It's not like he said so, but this is what felt that is beneath. And there was a huge uproar at the May 29th night. Netanyahu was so frustrated. He actually said, Lieberman is now a lefty. He's a liberal left wing, and said, which is funny. Everybody laughed at this. But then for Netanyahu, the thought was, it was 60. I can come up with 62, 63, 64. I will just, I'll get a redo, do it over. So, instead of working by Israeli government bill and allowing Benny Gantz the chance to form a government, Netanyahu dissolved the Knesset only to come up with the worst outcome of, we were going now from, I told you, 2015, 61, 2019 term A, 60, 2019 term B, 55. That was a very disappointing result for Netanyahu, and it made Lieberman very forceful and very promising. And he was starting to enjoy the process. He got a lot of attention. People called him the kingmaker. I even saw an AP headline yesterday calling Avigdor Lieberman the kingmaker.
Right.
But I think Lieberman also,
but he didn't make a king.
Exactly. He also failed himself. He was promising unity government. He was promising to be the one who will make the decision who goes first and so on. Nothing worked. To tell you that, you have such a limited power with 8 seats. After all, the big two players are still Gantz with the 33 seats, Netanyahu with the 32 seats. Those are the players. Israel's political system needs to be resolved between those two. It cannot be resolved by any other players. And right now, what we see is Netanyahu holding to power very strongly, unwilling to waive anything. And this is the situation. So he has, of course, he is the incumbent. So it's very difficult to
dislodge him.
Doesn't want to step down.
So given how difficult it is to dislodge Netanyahu, let's talk about what happened today with the indictment. So obviously we've been hearing for a long time that an indictment was coming, What actually happened today, and what has the reaction been so far from Netanyahu and from some of the other major political players?
So first, it came. It really happened. And, looking at this process for 3 years, 1 year of a police process and another 2 years of Mandelblit process, for some of the days and some of the relevant, procedures, phases, we kind of had a hard time believing that it will come, but the day came. And it wasn't with a surprise, because I think that we were ready for that in the last maybe a month or so. We've been told that this day will arrive. I think Mandelblit gave a very powerful statement, also talking a lot about the way Israel attorney generals and police forces were treated badly from the people that are under indictment, mainly Netanyahu, but there are also other suspects or other, you can call them defendant by now. They are together in the same situation, but mainly Netanyahu was using all of his, efforts to bash them and to humiliate them, and we've seen that for 2 years. Later on tonight, Netanyahu stood in front of the cameras and said, "This is a witch hunt. It's only because he's a right-wing politician." To my opinion, this is cynical. As we all know, Olmert was also a right-wing politician just before Netanyahu, and Netanyahu actually called for his ousting or stepping down. Mm-hmm. So the main focus of his speech tonight was how he is calling for inquiry, or maybe a formal investigation into the way the Attorney General and the Justice Department are conducting themselves. We do think that this call for specific Vadat Hakira, let's call it an inquiry committee or investigative panel. This call for this investigative panel will probably escort us and will be with us through the third campaign. Yes, this is it.
So talking about the third campaign, is it definite now, do you think, that we're going to a third election? Because I know that we've entered this 21-day period in which technically any 61 MKs can recommend a candidate to the president and could form a government. But it seems that the press is treating this as if it's done and dusted. There will be a third election, and it'll probably take place in March. Is that your sense?
Right now, yes. It is no longer 21 days. It's now down to 20, because there was one day that we are counting the days. So okay. By Sunday we will be at 18 or 17 already. So because tomorrow obviously it's a Shabbat, Friday and Shabbat, so there is nothing going on. So you can also start look at it from the 18th day on Sunday. The problem is that on that process, that has never been, we have never reached this situation in the history of the country. So this clause in the government bill was always there since the 60s, I think. But this is the first time that it is touched. It was an untouched territory. So for reporters and for media, it's really tricky to cover that. We didn't even know what's the procedure going to be like. And I tell you the truth, even the legal advisor of the Israeli parliament didn't know what is the procedure. This specific counsel, the legal counsel, the chief legal counsel of the Knesset, had to actually last night invent really a new procedure. It did not have any precedents. It did not have any history on that. He just had to come up with it. He made up the procedure, and some of the procedure is written in the law. According to procedure, 61 MKs, member of the Knesset, has to sign in writing their willingness to support one candidate. So Likud, for example, can support a candidate from Blue and White, and blue and white can support a candidate from the Likud. It's like a chaos. It's a chaotic process. According to what we know, none of those sides, the top politicians, has 61 votes. So unless there is an agreement, let's say, between some of the Likud members and blue and white to, for example, put the Gideon Sa'ar name, or there is a agreement with the Likud members to go, cross the lines and put another person from Benny Gantz or someone else, where Benny Gantz doesn't have a problem because he doesn't have indictments, right? But the Likud has to dissolve. It doesn't have to dissolve, but it has to be, how do you say that? The Likud has to come out against the prime minister, which is a huge problem for them, and they're unwilling to do it. So I don't see anyone from the Likud stepping out against the prime minister in putting the name of Benny Gantz, for example, for the good of the country. This is not going to happen, and vice versa. I don't think, in order for the blue and white to come out and say, okay, we support Gideon Sa'ar, you need Gideon Sa'ar to put in writing that he is agreeing to that.
So you're mentioning Gideon Sa'ar. So he's long been considered sort of Netanyahu's main rival within the Likud, at least at the moment. He's a former interior minister, a former education minister. He came out, I think earlier today, and said that he thinks that if they're going to a third election, the Likud party needs to have a primary for the leadership, and that he would challenge Netanyahu's leadership to lead the party. Why do you think he's doing that? And do you think that there is likely to be a Likud leadership election before a third general election, where Netanyahu, now that he's now been indicted, could face a real challenge to his ability to lead the Likud?
So to be exact, what Gideon Sa'ar said, he said the Prime Minister Netanyahu has failed twice to form a government, and therefore, if there is a third election, we need to consider, at least have the opportunity to give the Likud members a consideration, an opportunity to change the leadership. So after the third election, there will be a new personality and a person that will be able to unite Israel and stand and form a government. So it's right now, it's a problem of Likud inner rules and Likud constitution and bylaws. We have known from the past that whenever Netanyahu is trying to maneuver the Likud constitution, it's very easy for him. It's much easier than maneuvering Israeli laws. It's just like maneuvering your own, backyard. It's been done so many times. It's actually been done following the 21st Knesset when it was dissolved by Netanyahu. He also maneuvered the constitution of the Likud to make sure that he is the only candidate. And Gideon Sa'ar did not challenge him back then. But by now, Gideon Sa'ar is saying, let's have our own primaries. We haven't heard from Netanyahu on that front yet, only because there is the indictment on his head today. But the Likud will convene, the Likud party will convene on December 5th. And, I suppose there will be some other voices and other people that will call for this inner competition. However, if you ask me what's going to happen, what's my prediction, I think that Netanyahu is still able to get the Likud behind him and to be the candidate for the third time. I do not see at this point his grip of the Likud's mechanism is so strong, and his grip of all of the Likud institution is so strong. So I don't see anyone is being able at this point to convince him to do that.
So stepping back a minute from the party politics, how is all of this playing out with the voters, with the average Israeli? This is a totally unprecedented situation. You have a sitting prime minister under indictment. You're now looking like you're going to go to the third election in about 12 months, and third consecutive election. the notion that we were hearing over here was that Israelis really didn't want to go to a third election, that all the politicians were going to try to prevent it. And President Rivlin basically said it would be ridiculous to go through this again. But now it looks like it's going to happen. How is the general public reacting to that so far?
I have to tell you, I don't know yet, because we've been so busy with this 28-day process and now the indictment. And there's so many other things going on here. Gaza, Syria, Iran. I mean, we've been really crazy busy with attacks from Iran on our Syrian border. So I don't know what to tell you about public opinion. I have to tell you this: from the first round to the second round, the general atmosphere was that we're going to have an historic lower turnout because of the frustration with this second election that was really out of the ordinary and dissolved. I mean, the initiative to dissolve was, it came from the government, the Likud and everybody else. So the notion was that the public is going to punish the politicians. But we were surprised to find out on September 18th, the day after the election, that the Israeli public was actually, going to the polls in actually, I think 0.5% higher. So the numbers went up. They went up big time at the Arabic society. They also went up in the Jewish society. So, and then, again, the entire polling said the turnout is going to be driven down, and just worked the opposite. So, yeah, I don't know what to tell you. I think the Israeli public as a whole shows a very big, civil loyalty, civil duty, a lot of care and involvement and engagement with the process. And it also shows you a lot of patience. We don't have a budget. We don't have, lots of money is missing from local initiatives, cities, kids, education, health system. The military needs the budget. The budget is missing, and you see that the effect of this horrible year on every corner. Now we are being told Israel rating is going to go down. We have a huge deficit. The deficit is growing. You have predictions of an even growing deficit coming up. Yet I see the Israeli public behaving in a very adult and responsible manner, something that I cannot say about the politicians, which are, to my opinion, childish and, on a sort of an ego trip.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So one question that we got from Howard is just about the timing of the indictment process moving forward, because one of the questions is Netanyahu going to be able to lead the Likud into an election campaign, technically still be running the country? And we saw that can sometimes be quite serious, as we've seen with the military operations that he's launched recently, and going to be defending himself in court against indictments on fraud, bribery, and corruption. How is he going to be able to do all that? Will the court process start very soon, or is there still a long amount of time before that starts?
Right. The court we're nowhere near the beginning of court hearings. Yeah. In order to begin, the process is so complicated here. In order to begin a court hearing, you actually need to have Netanyahu's immunity taken off, right? Mm-hmm. So there is a procedure that has to take place at the Knesset for immunity hearing.
So he has immunity right now?
So he has to come forward to the Knesset and ask for immunity, and he may, and there is a procedure, but the problem is that you cannot start the procedure of the immunity request because the Knesset was not formed, right? So we don't have the right committee. The Knesset has several committees. That there is one specific committee that is supposed to be dealing with immunity, with a request for immunity, but this committee was never formed because there was not a coalition formed, because there was not a government formed. So you can't have committee assignments in Israel at the moment, and because this committee was not formed, the legal process of the committee cannot begin. And as long as it doesn't begin, the court hearing can't begin. Does that make sense to you?
It's quite crazy, but it does make sense. Yes.
Can you imagine for your impeachment if the Congress is not fully evolved, for example, and you don't have committee assignments for this hearing, the Intel committee and so on, then you cannot invite witnesses, right?
Right.
It's hard to explain. We don't have a constitution. So because we don't have a constitution, there's a lot of these holes. And now, I mean, we are facing a huge hole, huge dark hole here. And obviously Netanyahu is fighting every bit of these procedures to make sure the committee will not be formed. He makes sure he will fight it, he will challenge it in high court, he will challenge it everywhere in order to postpone the process. This is one of the reasons Blue and White did not want to step into government with him, because they were absolutely sure that even if he will have an agreement with them on rotation, let's say that he is going on for the first year or first 8 months, and they will take, you know, the position thereafter, they were absolutely sure that he will use all means and all procedures and all these little clauses everywhere to make sure the committee doesn't do its work, the bills are changed, the public opinion is, you know, changed. He is calling for, as I said, he's calling for this investigation. He's using all of his efforts to make sure he's being untouched. And, you know, it's been working for him.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you sort of along those lines about two different things that happened in the past couple of weeks that sort of were in a way outside Israeli politics, but seemed to be very closely connected. One was the situation that happened with Gaza, of course, with the targeted assassination of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad leader, and then the few days of rocket fire into Israel and airstrikes on Gaza. I know some politicians were saying it appeared that there could have been, in part at least, a political motivation for Netanyahu in launching that campaign at the time that he did, or launching that strike. And then the other one was what we saw this week from our side of things, with Mike Pompeo coming out and talking about changing the US policy and saying that they would no longer consider settlements to be illegitimate under international law. Our sense here at J Street, and of many people here in the United States, was that the timing of that was also connected to the Israeli political process, that potentially that was, certainly we've seen it's within the pattern of what the administration wants to do, but that was potentially another gift to Netanyahu and the Israeli political right. And we since saw Netanyahu talking about renewing his support for annexation. So from the political perspective, I mean, how did you see either of those things impacting the overall calculus in this past week as Gantz tried to form a government? Was there a sense that, you know, these things are happening and they're really about politics instead of just being about security or about policy?
So allow me to be a naive Israeli on these issues. And I would say to you, first on the military operation. And we have big trust in Israel's chief IDFs. We always had, no matter who is the one. We went through really tough couple of years. We still are, specifically in the South, but the entire Israeli. And I think that this operation, even if I don't like it specifically or I'm feeling uncomfortable about it, still it was something that I would definitely, you know, back the Israeli military for doing it. I am counting on Israel Chief IDF and his entire staff for making the right decision on the right time with the right measures that they took. Yet I know there was another attack that went awfully bad, and I would wish Israel would apologize for that. I'm talking about the family that was just, you know, killed
Killed
which
by
is
mistake, or yes.
Awful. But for the jihadist terror top person, I would consider the Israeli military doing what it has had to do. The amazing, or maybe twist of events was with Hamas really kind of I don't want to say clapping, and cheering,
Hmm.
but obviously, I mean, obviously they were sort of on the Israeli side on that. So they were kind of happy to get rid of him. And you could have seen that in many reports and in the way they conducted themselves. So it also showed us of the big cooperation or the quiet behind the scene cooperation Israel has with the Hamas. And maybe you should remember that for our audience. You should remember that the way Israel cooperates with the Hamas for the future, if and when at any time Israel want to negotiate with them, we will be able to come up and say, oh, Netanyahu has already been negotiating with them and working with them. So on that front, I mean, the Hamas people were satisfied, with that. And Israel actually is doing the hard work for them, but it also was for the Israeli people. So, if it helps Netanyahu, it begins as a military operation with a military timing and all. Then, of course, Netanyahu takes things and twists them and also, makes his own capital out of them. He doesn't forget to make his own capital out of those things, bashing the Arabs and so on, and bashing Gantz and tapping into all of those emotions. But I don't think it began with his political interest. It may have been ended or recruited to his political interests.
Right.
As per the other announcement coming from, and also, by the way, there was a vast consensus here in Israel with respect to that military operation. With respect to the announcement from the State Department, I think it has more to do with the European Court of Justice ruling from 2 weeks ago, or maybe it was that week ago.
Last week.
Time fly here so fast. It has a lot to do with that. And I did not see it here as a political gift given by State Department to Netanyahu, because if that was the case, they needed a better timing. They want to help him. They have a third campaign. They can come up with, I don't know, maybe we can annex Sinai or so. I don't know what's left for them to offer.
Yeah.
But that was a joke. I'm sorry. For the third election. Yeah, I think it was an announcement that has to do with a lot of tension between the United States and the European Union.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the White House and State Department want to get the European Union to be on a warning, some sort of a warning with respect to commerce and so on. And also, what surprised me a bit was Benny Gantz's statement,
right,
that he is thanking the American administration for that resolution. And if you should know that Ambassador David Friedman, actually called Benny Gantz in advance and gave him the heads up for that decision. So Benny Gantz was ready with a welcoming statement, which surprised me a bit. It wouldn't say, to my opinion, that Benny Gantz is willing to annex the West Bank. It only said that, the legal situation is no longer something like that. It doesn't say that, Benny Gantz wants to annex it. So, but I think his statement this is maybe one thing that may drive, if we have another elections, this kind of statement may drive away some of the left-wing base, actually, and push them back to the hands of Labor. Labor actually came out with a statement against it. So you could see maybe a narrow divide starting to evolve here between those parties with respect to that statement.
So yeah, just, that leads us into, as we sort of wrap up, just looking ahead to what we might expect under this third election. And we've had so many conversations, you and I, this year between all these different elections, and you always say that you can't predict the future, which we respect. But with the last election, as you said, it really didn't differ that much. The second election, the outcome really didn't differ very much from the one before. It was kind of surprising how much the numbers pretty much held steady. You had the uptick in the Arab parties and a slight uptick for Lieberman.
I disagree.
Oh, you think there was?
Yeah, because so for the first time, blue and white, so another party took over the Likud in a substantial gap.
So I guess my question would be, in the third election, would you expect the results to track relatively close, or would we expect to see significant shifts? I mean, you've already said the joint list thinks they can get their numbers to go even up. Blue and white maybe is going to lose some voters to Labor and the sort of more left parties. What other trends might you expect to see on the right? Naftali Bennett has now joined with the Likud. I mean, what other things might we see that could impact the outcome? How is this stalemate going to get broken? Is it going to get broken in this next election?
I think Likud had a problem. They lost at least 2 seats to Shas. Shas, that's the sporadic ultra-Orthodox headed by Deri. So Deri and Shas grew from 7 to 9, and this is actually, those 2 seats came from the Likud. So I was wondering whether the Likud will try to win those votes back by conducting a campaign against the ultra-Orthodox on the sporadic side, because they are close allies. So I don't know. I don't know if it will happen, because definitely Netanyahu's main mission will be to gain more seats. And how do you come up with more seats? To me, it feels as if Netanyahu's growth into the religious Zionists, meaning the very far right wing, there is no more room for him to grow there. He took everything he could from them. What else can be done? He was trying to get a grip of the Russian immigrants from Lieberman, and it did not work. He puts lots of money into a Russian language campaign, and it was a huge failure for him. So where do you grow your base? You need to get back those 2 from Shas, maybe. I see a huge problem for Ayelet Shaked and Naftali Bennett. Naftali Bennett is now the defense minister, but he's not a Likud member. Obviously, the next day he will be out. Ayelet Shaked, the former justice minister, as well. Their party wasn't a big success. They have this kind of self-definition, huge issue. I don't know what they're going to do. And their voter base may be desperate, unhappy, disengaged, who knows. On the left wing, I don't know if there's going to be a union between Meretz and Labor. Maybe this time. Blue and white may lose some votes to the Labor. I'm not sure if that will happen. You know what? I'm having a hard time discussing this idea of a third election. I have to tell you, I get the chills just from thinking about it. I was planning, and I'm still planning, to go to Iowa and New Hampshire in February. I want to go and cover the caucuses and the primaries, and I've done that all. Every 4 years. I've been waiting for January of 2020 every 4 years. I already got my plane tickets and hotels and everything, and I'm just in disbelief that So my chief executive editor said, go, don't worry, just Iowa is waiting for you. And I'm doing it. But while we talk about it, I'm just having a really hard time thinking in the process again of who is uniting, who is out of the Knesset, who is back in the Knesset. Oh my God. I mean, I hope it just doesn't happen.
Yeah, I think we all agree with you that it's mentally and even a little bit physically exhausting and hard to wrap our heads around.
We want to do Iowa. We don't want to do Jerusalem anymore.
Well, I'll just offer you that if you want to come back and have a call with us to report on what you're seeing in Iowa and New Hampshire, which obviously we're paying a lot of attention to as well, it would probably be fascinating to get the perspective of an Israeli.
I'm promising you I will be there. Des Moines is waiting for me.
Great. Well,
February
we'll look forward
1st.
to that. And before February, folks can, we'll probably check back in with Tal at some point as this continues, and folks can follow her on Twitter and her writing for Globes. But Tal, thanks so much for joining us at this crazy time.
Thank you.
And hopefully we won't have to go this third round with you, but we might.
If I might suggest, get a read of this indictment in English. It was published in English by several papers, I think Times of Israel and maybe Haaretz and others. They had the letter of indictment back in February, all translated into English. You would find it very, very interesting, and some names that American Jewish audience knows very well, with some of the big tycoons and donors on your side are in the indictment mentioned. So it's very interesting.
Great. Well, I'm definitely looking forward to that because seeing the nexus of involvement of the right-wing leaders over here with the right wing in Israel is always very informative. So thanks so much, Tal. Have a good rest of your night. And thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.